Even though we're getting the United States off the ground during Washington's presidencies, it's not as if we're turning a blind eye to what's happening in the rest of the world. These are things that we really need to acknowledge. So, a little bit of context here in terms of dealing with the French. We look at something called the French Revolution, which admittedly we are going to heavily, heavily simplify what that is. Now, ultimately, why do we care about France? Now, remember that France officially had been allies with us since February 1778, when Ben Franklin convinced them to sign two treaties with us. One was based on trade, and the other committed the French to a military alliance with the U.S. Now, by the wording of this alliance, France was to assist the United States in winning the American Revolution, while the United States would reciprocate by helping protect the lucrative French possessions in the West Indies. Now, in reality, France assisted the U.S. to defeat Britain rather than to, aid the Americans, but ultimately most were appreciative of France's help. Now, the man on screen, Marquis de Lafayette, also factored into our favorable opinion of the French since he arrived to independently assist us in the war, and frankly, he was one of Washington's favorites, so that's something that didn't necessarily hurt. So we get along pretty well with the French, to say the least. Now, the problems that led to France's revolution had been brewing for some time. You got three social classes in France that are known as estates. You have the clergy, the nobility, and then what's called the third estate. And about 97% of France fell into that last category, and even though some were beginning to rise in society, many were peasants with few rights. So that's where the unequal society comes into play. France also was left with a massive amount of debt due to their assistance of us in the revolution, and that's certainly not going to help matters. And in the mid-1780s, France also began to experience historic droughts that led to a wheat and grain shortage and dramatically increased food prices. So you have a nation that's bankrupt, where the people are angry and hungry. That's not necessarily a good combination in any way, shape, or form. Now, you add this up, what are the results? As Washington assumed the presidency, the image you see on screen, the Bastille fell. And the Bastille was a prison and armory where they kept the weapons of Paris, and it was a symbol of the oppression of the French monarchy. Now, the commander of the Bastille was killed, and this is viewed as the start of the French Revolution. Thomas Jefferson was in France when it began, and he even helped Lafayette write what was called a Declaration of the Rights of Man and the Citizen. And this is a document explicitly modeled on the Declaration of Independence. Now, Jefferson and his followers viewed the French Revolution as an extension of the Americans since it was very much inspired by us, and he believed that the Americans needed to support the French. But things are going to take an ugly turn when the king and queen are going to be executed several years after the Bastille falls. There's going to be a belief that perhaps the French Revolution has ultimately gone too far. And now all of this begs the question, how does it affect us? How does a revolution occurring across the Atlantic have any bearing on the new United States of America? Now, the decision to execute King Louis XVI and his wife Marie Antoinette are going to lead to France's declaration of war against Great Britain. At this time, America is just beginning to split into two political camps, what they called factions. You have Alexander Hamilton's Federalists and Thomas Jefferson's Republicans. It says Democratic Republicans because officially that's what they were called, but Democratic is crossed out because they just called themselves Republicans. Not to be confused with the Republicans of the modern political era. They believed in Republican government, as in representative government. Now, the entire event led to the formation of what were called Democratic Republican societies, and they really gave American politics a raucous feel. So instead of politely discussing politics in parlors and taverns, mobs of people are more likely to voice their opinions in the streets. And it was the boisterous feel of all this that led a lot of Federalists to be suspicious of that concept of democracy. Now, France had transitioned from a monarchy to a republic in which everyone was treated as an equal citizen. Everyone was even addressed simply as citizen. To gain America's favor and continue this alliance, they sent Edmond Charles Genet in 1793. And he was actually treated like royalty by democratic republican societies, and he even tried to recruit soldiers and privateers without government permission. Privateers meaning private naval ships that are kind of recruited for military purposes. Now, Washington knew we could not afford to get involved because we were too young of a nation. And he also didn't want to antagonize Great Britain, who's one of our biggest trading partners. Plus, he definitely is not happy with the excessive violence that has occurred on account of the French Revolution. Now, above all, he's furious, absolutely furious at the actions of Genet. So he orders a proclamation of neutrality using logic that Hamilton came up with. We signed our treaties with the French monarchy. France is no longer a monarchy, it's a republic. Therefore, the treaties are null and void. We don't have to honor them. That's the logic that he uses. And Republicans view it as a betrayal of our alliance. Republicans are also upset that this was an executive proclamation, meaning the president is saying it. And they reason that if Congress has the power to declare war, then they should be the ones to have the power to declare neutrality. And this really is going to lead to a significant split in his cabinet, with Treasury Secretary Hamilton on one side, the leading Federalist, and Secretary of State Jefferson and his Republicans on the other side.